Thus, morality depends on God's commandment. Hello, my name is Bruno Sankey. I am a PhD student in philosophy at the Federal University of Uberlândia, Brazil, where I research the relationship between divine command theory and positions in metaethics. I am preparing for a period at the University of Oxford, where I will continue to develop my research, and I wanted to share with you all an overview of what I have been working on. I've prepared a text, so I will read it with you. The purpose of this text is to present my doctoral research, which aims to develop a synthetic divine command theory, grounding the relationship between divine command theory and metaethical positions. To achieve this, I will first present taxonomies of metaethical positions and finally introduce my integrated theoretical proposal. Then I will start reading um, I, a taxonomy of positions in metaethics. If you read books about metaethics, you can find different types of taxonomies. I will present mine. Then I will propose here a taxonomy of metaethical positions regarding the meaning of moral assertions. Similar to Miller's proposal, this classification starts from the distinction between cognitivism and non-cognitivism, but makes it more complex in order to be more exhaustive and to reflect other subdivisions proposals. I prefer to adopt this classification, divide positions into cognitivism and non-cognitivism instead of descriptivism and no-descriptivism as proposed by Richard Hare, because, as will be considered, there are forms of cognitivism that are not descriptivist. This is very important. There are versions of cognitivism that are not descriptivist. Then, cognitivism and descriptivism are not the same thing. For example, Derek Park proposed a cognitivist view that is non-descriptivist. Then we have the non-descriptivist cognitivism adopted by Derek Perth, also called non-realistic cognitivism. This is another important thing. Not all forms of objective cognitivism are realist. Realism and the objectivism are not the same thing. The first major division is between one, cognitivism, and two, non-cognitivism. Cognitivism holds that moral judgments express beliefs that can be true or false, whereas non-cognitivism affirms that moral judgments do not express beliefs, but attitudes, feelings, or commands, and therefore do not have truth value. Furthermore, there are mixed theories, such as expressivist cognitivism, which seeks to combine elements of both cognitivism and non-cognitivism. And an additional stand, which is the rejection of fitting into any previous classification, which is quietism. Quietism suspends the ontological and semantic debate. Thus, we have the following taxonomy. First, we have cognitivism. Cognitivism holds that moral judgments express beliefs that can be true or false. Within cognitivism, there are several currents. For example, we have error theory. Error theory holds that our moral judgments are false because they presuppose the existence of objective moral proprieties, which do not really exist, but are still practically useful. For example, we have Mackey, John Mackey. John Mackey holds this view called Error theory. For this view, moral judgments have truth value, but all moral judgments are false. Then we have subjectivism. Subjectivism maintains that the truth value of moral judgments depends on the attitudes, feelings, or beliefs of subjects. Within subjectivism, we can distinguish different stands. First, we have relativist subjectivism. This is important. Subjectivism and relativism are not the same thing. There are forms of subjectivism that are relativist, but not all forms of subjectivism are relativist. Then we have some forms of subjectivism which are relativist. Relativist subjectivism argues that moral truth is relative to the opinions or feelings of individuals or cultures. This type of subjectivism can be further subdivided into. Then we have types of relativist subjectivism, two main types. First, we have individual subjectivism. According to individual subjectivism, moral sentences are true by virtue of the opinions or feelings of the individual. Then we have cultural subjectivism. According to cultural subjectivism, moral sentences are true according to the norms of a culture. Then we have forms of non-relativist subjectivism. According to non-relativist subjectivism, this is according to non-relativist subjectivism, the feelings or opinions of the subject determine moral truth, but propose that there is a universal or ideal standard to be followed. Then, according to subjectivism, what determines the moral truth is an opinion or a feeling of a subject, but there is a universal standard which must to be followed. Then we have the famous divine command theory. I know here I'm being a bit, I don't know how to say, it's a bit controversial, but for me, simple forms of divine command theory are forms of subjectivism, because according to divine command theory, moral truth depends on God's commands, and God is a subject. But the God's commands are universal. That's why divine command theory is a form of non-relativist subjectivism. Then we have some forms of divine command theory. In the text below, I will give more details about divine command theories, but here it's enough to talk about three forms of divine command theory. First, we have voluntarist divine command theory. According to voluntarist divine command theory, moral truth depends on God's free will. It means that God's commands are based on his free will. It means that God chooses. It's God's choice what is right and what is wrong. Then, if God wanted another list of commands, it would be different. The morality would be different because morality depends on God's free will. But we have a modified divine command theory from Robert Adams, especially. According to this view, moral truth depends on commands given by a loving God. Then God's commands are just according to morality because they are based on a loving God's nature, or the nature of a loving God. Then we have rational divine preference theory. According to rational divine preference theory, moral truth depends on commandments given by God in accordance with his rational interests. This is a form of preferentialism. I will talk more about it soon. Then these are the three main forms of divine command theory we can consider here. But in the text below, I will talk more, or I will talk in more detail about different forms of divine command theory. Then we have ideal observer theory. According to the ideal observer theory, the truth of moral judgment depends on the approval of one or more ideal observers. These ideal observers, these ideal observers, do not exist in reality, but they can be used as an ideal to based on morality. Then we have theomorphic ideal observer theory. According to a theomorphic ideal observer theory, the ideal observer is identified with God. Uh, the difference between theomorphic ideal observer theory and divine command theory is that in divine command theory, God really exists. And in the theomorphic ideal observer theory, God is an ideal. God does not need to exist. We just need to think about God and think about what God would command. Then we also have the anthropomorphic ideal observer theory. According to the anthropomorphic ideal observer theory, the ideal observer or observers are conceived as a hypothetical human or humans endowed with rationality, full information, and emotional balance. Then we imagine kind of a Superman, and we can ask, what would a Superman choose? What would a Superman think? Then we can base morality on it. We also have, it's from the more recent literature, what we call constructivism. According to constructivism, for example, from Korsgaard, moral truths are constructed from rational or intersubjective procedures. This is a form of subjectivism because moral truths are based on intersubjective procedures. But this is not a kind of relativism. That's why constructivism is a type of non-relativist subjectivism. Then we have objectivism. Objectivism affirms that there are objective moral truths, independent of individuals' beliefs or attitudes. It's important to remember that objectivism and realism are not the same thing. I'll explain more about it, but realism is committed with facts and properties in an ontological sense. Here we do not need an ontological sense. Objectivism just affirms that there are objective moral truths. It's not an ontological thesis, it's an epistemological one. That's the difference between objectivism and realism. Realism is a thesis about ontology, and objectivism is a thesis about truth and epistemological perspective. Within objectivism, there are two main branches. First, we have moral naturalism, and we also have moral non-naturalism. First, let's take a view about moral naturalism. Moral naturalism holds that moral properties are natural and accessible by empirical methods. Then moral naturalism holds that moral properties are natural. What does it mean, natural? It means that those properties are accessible by science. Nature is what can be the object of natural science. This is nature. Nature is what can be object or subject. I would say subject. Nature is what can be subject of a ideal natural science. Nature is what the science studies. Then we have some types of moral naturalism. We have reductionist naturalism, and we also have non-reductionist naturalism. Let's talk first about reductionist naturalism. This approach identifies moral properties with specific natural properties, such as pleasure or well-being. For example, or for instance, if you are in utilitarianism, for example, a type of hedonist utilitarianism, we may believe that pleasure is the right thing to choose. Then, if you believe pleasure is moral goodness, you are a reductionist naturalist. But we have two types of reductionist naturalism. First, we have analytical reductionism. According to analytical reductionism, moral language can be reduced to natural or scientific language. For example, you can replace in language pleasure by goodness, moral good, or moral goodness. Then we also have the synthetic reductionism. According to synthetic reductionism, although there is an identity between moral and natural properties, it is not a linguistic reduction. According to synthetic reductionism, a moral property and a natural property can be identified in reality, but we cannot reduce moral words to natural words. Now we also have non-reductionist naturalism. Non-reductionist naturalism is not the same thing as synthetic reductionism. It's different. That's the difference between, for example, Peter Reuilton and the classic view of Cornell realism. Because according to non-reductionism in Boyd or Brink from Cornell realism, moral properties are irreducible, though is still natural, as they supervene our own or depend on natural facts. This is the difference. Here, we have ontological reductionism. We don't have linguistic reductionism. But here, we do not have neither ontological or either linguistic reductionism. Here we have a non-reductionism view. But here we have an idea about supervenience, emergentism. It's kind of the idea that moral properties supervene on natural properties. We also have another view called moral non-naturalism. And moral non-naturalism holds that moral properties are non-natural, accessible by intuition or practical reason. The main approach include we have first moral Platonism, affirms that objective moral facts are abstract entities. This is the view of Michael Huemer. Michael Huemer is also an intuitionist. Then Michael Huemer can also be in this second classification here. What is intuitionism about? According to intuitionism, moral truths are directly accessed by moral intuitions without recourse to natural properties. This view can be combined with moral Platonism. This is the case of Huemer. We also have non-realist rationalism. This is Derek Parfit's view, and that's why I said that objectivism and realism are not the same thing. This is a objectivist view which is not realist. What does rationalism say? Non-realist rationalism accepts the idea of moral truth except through reason as meaningful, but without a strong ontological commitment to moral entities. If you believe that there exists or there are moral truth, but there is no ontological moral properties, you are a non-realist rationalism. This is the view from by Derek Parfit. Then we also have the second branch of the classification. All the views we saw are branches of cognitivism. Now we will see non-cognitivism. Non-cognitivism rejects the idea that moral judgments have truth value in a strong sense. According to this perspective, moral statements express attitudes or prescriptions, not beliefs. Although these often appear or are adopted in mixed way, the main theories within non-cognitivism are, first we have the more simple view called emotivism. Emotivism maintains that moral judgments express emotions. Then we also have prescriptivism. Prescriptivism affirms that moral statements are universal orders or prescriptions. This is Richard Hare's view. We also have quasi-realism from Blackburn. Alan Gibbard also adopts a type of quasi-realism. That's why I said that those views can be often adopted in mixed ways. But according to quasi-realism, quasi-realism attempts to explain the use of moral language realistically through the idea of projectivism. What is projectivism? Projectivism is the view that feelings and other reactions triggered by natural features produce morality or aesthetic. It's the view that we have feelings. There are just two things, our feelings and the natural world. Then, for example, when we have a natural property, we have a response in our attitudes to those properties, to these properties. And we usually project these attitudes in the outside, in the external world. That's why we have the feeling that right, wrong belongs to the external world. But those feelings are really part of our psychology. But quasi-realism believes that those feelings can be judged according to objectivist standards, objective standards. Then we also have normative expressivism from Alan Giberger. It's a development of prescriptivism from Richard Rohr, combined with crazy realism. And according to normative expressivism, moral judgments express commitments to normative standards or norms, and it is a development of prescriptivism. Then we have a hybrid theory. It is called expressivist cognitivism. Expressivist cognitivism is a mixed theory combining elements of cognitivism and non-cognitivism. According to this approach, a moral judgment expresses both a belief, which can be true or false, and an attitude or normative commitment. The theory seeks to integrate the explanatory advantages of both approaches, offering a more complete view of moral judgments. Then, according to expressivist cognitivism, moral judgments have two aspects. First, it expresses our feelings or moral feelings. And second, it expresses our beliefs. And our moral feelings can be judged according to a objective standard. And our moral judgments can also be judged according to an objectivist standard. The difference is that our moral feelings can be appropriate or non-appropriate, inappropriate, and our beliefs can be true or false. We also have creatism. Creatism argues that moral language is functional and intelligible, but without substantial metaphysical commitment. The theory recognizes that meta-normative disputes are possible, but cannot be conclusively resolved. The main challenge here is to maintain a weak normative realism without a clear ontological base. Then we have another classification of positions in metaethics. This classification divides approaches between internalism and externalism, reflecting a distinction concerning the nature of practical reasons. Practical reasons are what count in favor of acting in a certain way. Practical reasons can be distinguished between internal reasons and external reasons. Internal reasons are those that are identical to or reducible to psychological states. And external reasons, in turn, are normatively reducible reasons. That is, reasons that cannot be reduced to psychological states. Thus, we have the following views. First, internalism. Internalism is the position according to which normative reasons are identical or reducible to internal reasons that are subject, currently has, or would have in ideal situations. Externalism, on the other hand, is the position according to which, in addition to internal reasons, we have reducible normative reasons. Internalism itself is divided into analytic internalism and non-analytic internalism. Analytic internalism asserts that to say someone has a normative reason means to say that this person possesses or would possess certain internal reasons. On the other hand, non-analytic internalism claims that although normative reasons are in reality identical or reducible to internal reasons, normative moral concepts are not reducible in the field of language to internalist concepts. Then we have another taxonomy about theories of motivation. Then another discussion concerns theories of motivation. This is a discussion about the source of motivation, for example, for moral actions, moral behaviors. Then we have psychologism. According to psychologism, mental states like beliefs and desires can motivate action. And we also have anti-psychologism. This is the thesis that non-psychological states, such as objective normative reasons, can also be source of motivation. Within psychologism, we also have some variants. First, we have strict Humean psychologism from David Hume. It holds that only desires and not beliefs can motivate intentional actions, and that a belief that something is morally right cannot by itself generate a desire that motivates action. Then we also have moderate Humean psychologism. Moderate Humean psychologism admits that moral beliefs automatically generate desires, but it is the desires, not the beliefs, that properly motivate action. We also have moderate cognitivist psychologists. According to this view, both beliefs and desires as mental states can motivate action. Finally, we have pure cognitivist psychologism, or just pure cognitivism. This view maintains that only beliefs, particularly normative or rational ones, or rational beliefs, motivate actions, and desires play no causal role in motivation. Then we have another classification. Yes, it's very there are a lot of classifications. The taxonomy is not easy. And the reason why it's so important to make those classifications is because there is no unique view. What is the right way to classify those perspectives? And I'm trying to propose my own view. Then we have theories of justification. Another classification concerns theories of justification. For example, what justifies moral action? It's what I need to answer when someone asks me, what are the reasons you did that? What is your justification to act correctly? Three main theories stand out in this debate. First, we have the theory of the dictate of reason. We have this view in the Middle Age, in the medieval philosophy, in Thomas Aquinas, for example. We also have this view in Kant, for example. And this view maintains that simply recognize something as dirty, required by reason, is by itself sufficient to justify the correct action. Reason has and not, like ought, an imperative force. For example, when I ask you, what is the result of the sum 2 plus 2? You can answer me, 4. And I can ask you back, why should I accept this result? I understand 2 plus 2, according to math's rules, equals 4. But I'd like to know, why should I accept math? At first glance, we can be a bit lost when someone asks something like that, but we could just answer, because this is what reason requires. You ought to accept that 2 plus 2 is equals 4. This is what reason requires. Reason requires you to accept. This is a not sentence. This is the theory of dictate of reason in morality. If someone asks you, why should I do the right thing? You can just answer, because this is what reason requires. We have another theory. This theory is adopted by Peter Singer, for example, which is the theory of internal resonance. According to this theory, an adequate answer to the question, why should I do the right thing, must be concerned to the agent's desires, either those the agent currently has or those they would have under ideal conditions of information and rationality. Finally, we have the divine command theory of moral obligations. I think this is the view from John Hare. This is also the view from Thomas Carson. And this view affirms that the only fully sufficient answer to this question, why should I do the right thing, is because that is what God requires of me. This is very interesting because if you ask to someone who adopts this theory, can a atheist act morally, can do, let me put this in other words. Can the atheist do the right thing? Or maybe we could also ask, can the atheist be a moral person? Those who adopt this view will say, yes, an atheist can do the right thing. An atheist can be a good person, but he cannot justify it. This is the divine command theory of moral obligations. Then we have another field. This is the field about value. Value in this sense, in moral sense. Here it is not exactly in the moral sense. Value is in the sense of what is desirable for its own sake. Then we have the following taxonomy. We have monist theories. Monist theories in axiology, or theories of value, affirm that there is only one kind of thing that possesses no instrumental value. It is good in itself. We have hedonism. Hedonism states that only pleasure and or the absence of pain has no instrumental value. Then we have 3 types of hedonism: sensational hedonism, motivational hedonism, and adverbial hedonism. Sensational hedonism defines pleasure as a specific sensation with its own phenomenological properties. Motivational hedonism defines pleasure as the attitude of wanting something to continue. It is something preferred to having it not. Adverbial hedonism understands pleasure as the pleasurable manner of engaging in activity, regardless of what the activity is. Transversely, hedonism can be classified into quantitative hedonism and qualitative hedonism. Do you remember from the discussion between John Stuart Mill and Bentham? And here is the difference, because Bentham adopts a quantitative hedonism and John Stuart Mill adopts a qualitative hedonism. According to quantitative hedonism, pleasure differs only in quantity, not in quality. And according to qualitative hedonism, pleasure differs in quality and dignity, in addition to quantity. We also have preferential theory, or preferentialism. It states that only the satisfaction of desires or preference has no instrumental value. It's divided into, we have three types of preferential or preferentialism. It's better to say preferentialism. We have actual preference theory, which considers the satisfaction of preference as they actually are to be valuable. Ideal preference theory, which considers the satisfaction of preference an agent would have under ideal deliberative conditions to be valuable. Finally, we have, this is a form of divine command theory, which is the divine preference theory, which states that no instrumental value consists in the satisfaction of divine will. In the second branch, we have pluralist theories. It means that they believe that more than one thing can have no instrumental value for its own sake, that can be followed for its own sake. First, we have value, the view that value is intrinsic equality theory. The intrinsic equality theory states that certain states of affairs possess intrinsic value due to their own quality, independently of their effects or the presence of desires. For example, a person who adopts this view can think that beauty, harmony, knowledge through contemplation are things that have intrinsic equality. We also have perfectionism, which holds that no instrumental value resides in the realization of human excellence, like virtues or capacities. It is subdivided into Aristotelian perfectionism. Aristotelian perfectionism maintains that the ultimate good consists in the realization of a set of human virtues of intrinsic value. It's important to say, although Aristotle have said that eudaimonia, or how can we translate that? It's not exactly happiness. It's something more like human realization. This is the view that human realization, in Greek, eudaimonia, is the thing that has no instrumental value. But according to Aristotle, eudaimonia involves a lot of virtues. That's why this is a pluralist view, because eudaimonia is not exactly one thing. It's like a cluster of virtues. This is an interpretation. There are people who interpret Aristotle in another way. There is an Aristotelian interpretation according to which eudaimonia is contemplation. But here I am adopting the inclusive view. According to it, Aristotle believed that eudaimonia is a cluster of virtues. That's why this is a pluralist view. We also have Nietzschean perfectionism. Here is another controversial point, because it's difficult to identify Nietzsche's view about morality. Sometimes it seems like Nietzsche would believe that suffering is good in itself, but I think this is more something like rhetorical, because Nietzsche holds that the ultimate good resides in the affirmation of life, creativity, psychic health, and vital force. This is the realization of human capacities. We also have theories of autonomy and authenticity. This view maintain that values such as autonomy, authenticity, self-knowledge, self-realization, reflective freedom, meaningful engagement, and personal integrity are distinct intrinsic goods. We also have relational value theories, which assert that certain types of human relationships possess no instrumental value, such as friendship, love, trust, or life in community. We also have this is the view by Derek Pert, objectivist theories. They assert that there is a plural and objective list of intrinsically valuable goods, such as knowledge, pleasure, friendship, virtue, contemplation, personal achievements, among others. This is, I promise, this is the last taxonomy I will present here, which is the taxonomy of divine command theories. I have mentioned in the text a lot of views, and between and among them, I talked about some types of divine command theories. But now, in the following text below, I will present a more detailed classification or taxonomy of divine command theories. First, we have the first taxonomy, the first classification, which is among semantic divine command theories, divine command theory of normative reasons, divine command theory of moral obligation, axiological divine command theory. This is the four brands. Then we have the first type of divine command theory, which are which is semantic divine command theories, or which are divine command theories. They hold that saying something is morally right means saying or is coextensive with saying that it is commanded by God. Then, about semantic divine command theory, we have three subtypes. The first one is voluntarist semantic divine command theory, which maintains that moral correctness consists in being commanded by God based on his sovereignty and free will. This is the view that God can choose his commands in as he wants. If God would like to command suffering as something that we should seek, then we should seek suffering, because this is what God's commands. Another type of semantic divine command theory is the modified divine command theory. I'm not sure if you know Robert Adams. Robert Adams first adopted this view, and after he changed to this other view. Let's talk about the first modified semantic divine command theory by Robert Adams. It maintains that the morally right is what is commanded by a loving God. I think this is also William Lane Craig's view. But Robert Adams changed his view to the Kripkean semantic divine command theory, which maintains that concepts like what a loving God commands and what is morally right are distinct in intention, it is meaning, but coextensive in all possible worlds, a necessary identity known a posteriori. I'm not sure if you are familiar with Kripke distinction about a priori, a posteriori. How can I explain it now? My name is Bruno, but my nickname is Sankey. And there are people who do not know that Bruno and Sankey are the same person. Then we have two names, two proper names, the name Sankey and the name Bruno. Some people know Sankey, and the other people know Bruno, and they do not know they are the same person. It means that we have two words, two terms, like with different meanings, It's not exactly meanings because here we have a proper name, but I would say meaning because I don't want to. We have two different terms, but those different terms refers to the same person. It's the same reference. This comes from Frege, the distinction between meaning and reference. Two words can have the same meaning, but they can differ in their reference, and two words can have this. It's the opposite. Two words can have the same reference, but differ in meaning. Like morning star and evening star. The morning star and the evening star are the same star. They are the same star. But in the ancient world, people didn't know that. But now we know that morning star and the evening star are the same thing. It's the same reference. This is something we know by experience. This we know by experience in Crippian sense is a posteriori. Posteriori. They are posteriori because we know them from experience. But Kripke has also an argument there that all identities are necessary. Then this is a necessary truth known a posteriori. Like Sanke is Bruno, morning star is the evening star. These are necessary identities known a posteriori. For this type of view, the identity between what a loving God commands and what is morally right is not an identity in meaning, but is an identity in reference. That means coextensive. They refer to the same thing. And this is a necessary identity. We know a posteriori. Then we have the second branch, the second group of divine command theories. They are the divine command theories of normative reasons. Divine command theory of normative reasons holds that moral normative reasons are identical to, or reducible to, or provided by God's commands. Then we have two types of views here. Remember the distinction between internalism and externalism? Well, we will need it here again, because we have internalist divine command theory, which maintains that normative reasons are identical or reducible to God's internal reasons. And we also have externalist divine command theory, which maintains that divine commands provide irreducible normative reasons. Then we have the third group of theories, which is the group of divine command theories of moral obligations. I have mentioned this before, and now I will define it again. The divine command theory of moral obligations maintains that the ultimate moral motivation to act rightly derives from divine authority. Then we have axiological divine command theory, which maintains that the ultimate good is determined by God's will. Then we have two subtypes of divine command theory of value: the realist divine preference theory and the counterfactual divine preference theory. The realist divine preference theory maintains that if a loving and omniscient God created the universe with a specific purpose, then his preference constitutes the objective standard for the correctness or rationality of human preference. Then we have the counterfactual divine preference theory. This is really a type of ideal observer theory, which asserts that the correctness of human preference should be evaluated based on the preference a perfect God would have if such a God existed. Now, what is my view? Of course, here I just did the taxonomy. In my thesis, I am exploring all those views with arguments, objections, relationships with divine command theory. Of course, I will not talk about all my research because it would be impossible given the time. I explore each of these theories in great depth in my thesis. However, here I will present only the synthesis that I am developing. I will remember you. I will remind you. I am developing. Sorry for the pronunciation. I am developing my research. It means that I do not have a complete theory or a closed answer to the problems I need to explore. My investigation is still partial, but here I will give some idea of the theory I am developing. I believe in a fruitful convergence between three contemporary approaches to normativity. This is the same view by Derek Parfit. He believes that we can combine Gibberty and Blackburn's quasi-realist expressivism, Thomas Nagel and Derek Parfit's non-naturalism, and non-realist cognitivism, and Peter Wilton's weak normative naturalism. Of course, I cannot explain how to combine those views here, but I believe that in a expressivist cognitivism, according to which moral judgments has a double aspect, it express a moral judgment, express a moral belief, which can be true or false, and an attitude, which can be appropriate or non-appropriate. And we have objective standards. And we can analyze if a attitude or a belief is correct or not based on it. And I am also not a realist because I believe in no objectivism, but without ontological or strong ontological implications. That's why it's a quasi-realist view, but it's also cognitivist. In my thesis, I am trying to propose that the best formulations of divine command theory can converge with this triple theory. What is the triple theory? The theory that wave together quasi-realist expressivism, non-naturalism and non-realist cognitivism, and weak normative naturalism. This can be combined because non-realist cognitivism does not believe in ontological moral propriety in the strong sense. In this thesis, I propose the best formulations of divine command theory can converge with this triple theory. This convergence presupposes a refined reinterpretation of DCT, divine command theory, capable of incorporate expressivist and cognitivist elements without relinquishing its theological foundation. Such a reinterpretation would involve first atheistic projectivism. Do you remember projectivism? We have the natural world, we have our feelings, our moral feelings, but we project our feelings in the external world. That's why we believe there is kind of a propriety, a moral propriety in the external world. But here I am proposing atheistic projectivism. We have feelings in response to God, not just to the physical or natural world. And according to atheistic projectivism, moral judgments express emotional response appropriate to God's authority and command, without being merely subjective or arbitrary. Second, it would include a theory of irrational divine preference. This is a type of preferentialism, according to which God's commands express his perfect and morally justified reasons, which is why these comments can serve as a criterion of correctness for the expressivist component of the moral judgment. Remind that my projectivism has a objective standard. And we have this objective standard because this standard is based on rational preference. Based on the conclusions of the chapters of my thesis, it seems that the best version of divine command theory is one that synthesizes these insights. The first presupposition of what I call the synthetic divine command theory is that if there exists, I'm not saying God exists, I will be impartial about it. I'm not sure if I can say God exists, but if God exists, the God in the traditional sense, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and all-knowing, all-power, all-might, all-might God, and all-good. This is the three O, omniscient, all-knowing, omnipotent, all-might, omnibenevolent, all-good. If there is a God like that, who created the universe and human beings with certain purpose or reasons, and who deeply cares about the well-being of his creatures, then divine preference, rational divine preference, serve as the ultimate criterion for judging the correctness or rationality of human preference, as well as for evaluating the value of things. This God desires the good of all his creatures. And this good, here I also need a theory of non-instrumental value. This good is recognized by him. God does not create goodness. He just recognizes it, not determined merely by his will. The good due to each creature follows from the imitation of divine perfections in creation. Here I am following a theory or theology of the perfect being. What is the theology of the perfect being? God has a good essence, a good nature, and all the universe is an imitation of God's nature. God is beautiful, and we have built in the universe. The strongness of a stone imitates God's power. This is the theology of perfect being. The universe is an imitation of God's perfection. And each thing has a nature. And the goodness of this nature consists in the realization of the end of this nature. And the end of a nature is to imitate God's nature. The goodness of a tree is to give good fruits. The goodness of human beings is happiness, eudaimonia. In the case of human beings, the ultimate good consists in the life of flourishing or full realization, eudaimonia, from Aristotle. God commands human beings based on what constitutes their full realization. Moreover, God desires the good of all creation. So this includes not only humans, but also animals, and the care for the entire created order. The synthetic divine command theory holds that God issues both necessary moral commands based on recognition of the good independence of his will, and the contingent commands. This is a type of moderate voluntarism related to norms, practices, and institutions whose moral value depends on historic context or specific theological purpose. Such divine commands encompass universal moral issues as well as social or liturgical norms pertinent to particular context. A crucial distinction in this theory is between normative justification and psychological motivation. The belief that an action is commanded by God can morally justify the action regardless of the agent's psychological motivation. Even if the agent does not recognize or is not motivated by this command, the objective reason to act according to the divine command remains valid. Thus, the theory adopts an externalist perspective, recognizing the reducibility of moral normativity. Furthermore, the synthetic divine command theory reformulates the divine command theory of moral obligations by suggesting that divine commands are sufficient but not necessary for moral obligation. While divine commands may provide valid reasons for moral action, moral normativity can also be grounded in reasons independent of divine commands. Therefore, atheists have sufficient justification for moral life. But if God exists, divine command provides an additional, complementary reason for moral normativity. In this context, synthetic divine command theory aligns with the theory of the dictate of reason, which holds that practical reasons sufficient to ground moral normativity. I also try to make or to wave together divine command theory and natural law theory. But here I adopt a theory of promulgation via natural law, suggests that divine commands can be known through proper use of reason in moral matters, regardless of explicit belief in God. Thus, synthetic divine command theory maintains that morality does not depend on religion, upholding ethics as a discipline of natural reason. Finally, if God exists, he serves as an ideal to correct human preference, with God's rational desires functioning as the criterion for evaluating the good. However, even if God's absence, human preferentialism can be applied. Something is valuable or has positive non-instrumental value if and only if a rational, reflective, and sufficiently informed agent would prefer it to its absence, based on an empirically possible cognitive perspective, without better or equally good alternative perspectives leading to an opposite preference. In sum, this is the last sentence. The divine command theory attains its most robust and comprehensive form when combined with cognitivist expressivism and a refined understanding of normative reasons, thus offering a theological grounded yet philosophical sophisticated account of moral normativity. Of course, this is not the end of my research. This is just a provisional conclusion. I need to do more research. I need to do more investigation. That's why I intend to go to the University of Oxford. I need to talk with professors. I need to present my research because it's just in the beginning. I don't have close conclusions. There are a lot of problems I also need to deal. There are more theories I also need to analyze. That's why I am preparing to do an internship at the University of Oxford. I will stop sharing my screen because I would like to talk about a fundraising campaign that I'm doing. Let me just pause here. I will share another screen. Um, here, here. This is um, this is a site. I will let it in the description below. Um, because I am preparing to study at the University of Oxford, but I am poor. I am a person of color. I am from a sexual minority. Then I do not have enough resource. I will receive a scholarship from the Brazilian government, but it's not enough to pay, for example, the fees or other expense in the university. And if you want to help me to study at the University of Oxford, I know I need to improve my pronunciation, my language. I need to improve my research. But if you want to help me to study there, I will stay there during 6 months from September to March. And I needed your help. If you want to help, go in the description below. You will find this link and you can click here. I want to help. You will click here. I want to help. And if you want to help, I will be very helpful. You can use your card to help. If you live in Brazil, you can use your Pix. But if you don't live in Brazil, you can use your card and it will be very helpful. You can help me with any value. Any value can help me, please. It's important to me. If you want more informations, documents, because you need to be sure that I'm not lying, you can click here. For transparency purpose, I will always put the documentation related to the sandwich doctor. The sandwich is an expression in Brazil for an internship abroad and the trip to Oxford on this drive. Of course, I know my English needs some improvement. I know my research needs improvement. But if you help me to study in Oxford, of course, it will be very good for my research, good for for philosophy, because I think I have something new to contribute to the research about philosophy of religion, ethics, and so on. Subscribe to my channel. My long videos are in Portuguese, but my short videos are in English. I will finish here and bye bye.